There is a photograph that goes beyond football, yet it is iconic in the history of Manchester United. It was taken at Wembley Stadium on the night of May 29, 1968. It shows Matt Busby, his face etched with a look beyond exhaustion, beyond even ecstasy, a look of deep, almost painful satisfaction. In his hands, he holds the European Cup. Most who see this photograph see a successful manager, a winner, the end of a long journey. But to truly understand that photo, you must learn to see what is not there. And you need not to be a Manchester United supporter to feel the weight of that absence. You need only to be human. This is not just a football story. It is a universal story about the soaring height of a dream and the devastating price it can demand. You must be able to see the 8 empty spaces where his young men, his babes, should have been standing were it not for that tragedy in Munich airport. You must feel the absence of Duncan Edwards, a force of nature who would have dominated that stage. You must miss the cheeky smile of Eddie Coleman, the steady leadership of Roger Bryan, the goal-scoring prowess of Tommy Taylor. That photograph is not just an image of victory, it is a portrait of a promise kept, a ghost story, and a love story, all at once. The journey between that emptiness and that trophy, that is the defining story of this club. It is a story that began with the most thrilling, most talented young team England had ever seen. A team that danced with destiny and made the whole country believe in a new kind of football. And it is a story that was almost erased 10 years earlier by the cold and the snow on a Munich airport runway. So, as we journey back in time, I want to leave you with a question to reflect on. What is the true price of a dream? And what does it mean to be left behind, tasked with building a future from the pieces of a shattered past? But before the snow, there was sunshine. Before the silence, there was the roar of the crowd. And before the world knew their names in mourning, they knew them as heroes. They were the Busby Babes, and this is how their dream started and almost ended in a plane crash in Munich airport. In the heart of Manchester, during the mid-1950s, a miracle was unfolding. Old Trafford was not just a stadium. It was a stage where youth danced with destiny. At a time when English football was built on strength and experience, one man dared to dream differently. His name was Matt Busby. To him, football was not just a game of results, it was a vision. He believed in the untamed energy of teenagers who could be molded into legends. And so, from the academy they came. Watch them in a training match. Eddie Coleman, with a cheeky shuffle of his hips, sends a defender the wrong way. While Duncan Edwards, a man in a teenager's body, unleashes a shot that thunders against the crossbar. The sound echoes around an empty Old Trafford, a promise of the noise to come. They were the Busby Babes, a nickname that captured both their innocence and their brilliance. Manchester United was not just winning matches, they were rewriting the language of football. They conquered the English League in 1996 and again in 1997. Their style breathtaking, their bond unbreakable. And as they traveled back home from Belgrade in February 1958, they were once again at the top of the league, ready for a historic third title in a row. Crowds filled the stadiums, not just to watch a team play, but to witness a dream take flight. These young men were more than footballers. They were symbols of hope, of post-war Britain rising from the ruins. But in every soaring dream, there is a shadow. And on February 6, 1958, that shadow would take the form of a snow falling on a Munich airport runway. February 1958, the young Manchester United team had just returned from Belgrade, having secured their place in the semifinals of the European Cup. They were carrying the Bride of England. The journey home began with laughter. The players, barely teenagers, swapped stories and smiles. The aircraft, a British European Airways Elizabethan, made a scheduled stop in Munich to refuel. Outside, snow fell silently. Inside, the mood was light. Some players read newspapers, others played cards. But fate has a way of hiding its art. While they laughed, the skies above Munich became heavier. The snow did not stop. They had no idea. The dreamers were flying home, unaware that destiny had chosen Munich Airport as the stage for its most cruel twist. Munich, February 6, 1958. The stop was meant to be brief, but outside, winter had turned hostile. Inside the plane, the players kept their spirits up, yet beneath the laughter, there was restlessness. The engines roared to life, and the first attempt to take off rattled every heart on board. The plane surged forward, but the speed would not come. The captain had no choice but to stop. A second attempt followed, and again the same results. The only sound was the frantic hammering of a heart, and it took Matt Busby a moment to realize it was his horn. He looked out the window at the swirling white void and saw not snow, but a shroud. Captain James Stein knew the danger. The runway was not just wet, it was covered in a layer of heavy, wet slush. He suspected this layer of slush was acting like a brake, stealing the precious speed needed to lift the airplane into the skies. The crew debated. For a moment, there were talks of staying, but schedules pressed. Manchester awaited. It was a calculated risk. The decision was made. They would try once more, gambling that this time, power would overcome the grip of the ground. As the engines roared to life for the third time, breaths hung heavy in the air. The next few seconds would decide everything. At exactly 3:04 p.m., the engines screamed against the snow-filled air. The Elizabethan roared forward, its wheel blowing through the deep slush. It felt heavy, sluggish, like it was trying to sprint through water. The critical takeoff speed was a distant target, the end of the runway rushing closer. The slush had won. The cockpit, the pilots desperately tried to control the plane, but physics is unforgiving. The plane could not lift itself. What followed next was a tragedy. The plane went past the runway and into a fuel storage house. The explosion that followed was deafening. In seconds, what had been laughter and ambition became confusion and silence. Out on the frozen ground of Munich, the unthinkable had happened. Manchester United's future had been torn apart. The first thing Harry Gregg saw was a pair of football shoes, scattered in the snow, laces still tied. Then he saw the fire, and he stopped thinking altogether. He just moved. Out of the wreckage staggered survivors, confused and shocked. Though barely alive himself, instincts took over. He became a rescuer. Again and again, he went back into the broken plane, dragging teammates and passengers to safety. He pulled out Poppy Charlton and Dennis Violet, then manager Matt Busby, battered and barely conscious. The Manchester United team had set out to conquer Europe. Now, the question was not that of medals, but that of survival. When the smoke cleared, the scale of the tragedy became unbearable. 23 lives were lost that day. Roger Bryan, the captain who never showed fear. Eddie Coleman, whose dribbling skills could make a crowd roar. David Beck, Tommy Taylor, whose smile could lit up a room. Duncan Edwards, their names are spoken even now, not as statistics, but as echoes of what could have been. Yet amidst the loss, there were those who survived, carrying scars that went far deeper than flesh. Bobby Charlton, Bill Fox, Dennis Violet, and Matt Busby clinging to life at the hospital. For those who walked away, Munich was not a moment of luck, but a lifetime of responsibility, a debt to be paid in memory and in strength. Their survival was a promise to live for those who could not, and to complete the dream they had begun with their fallen comrades. In a Munich hospital, Matt Busby lay between life and death. Through a haze of pain and morphine, he forced his eyes open. Every breath was a knife. He found Jimmy Murphy's face in the blur. His lips, cracked and dry, formed the only question that mattered. The team. How is the team? The answer would break him, but it would also ignite the fire that kept him alive. Back in Manchester, Jimmy Murphy, the man who had stayed behind, became the club's backbone. We cannot let them disappear, he told a group of survivors and youth players, his voice raw with a grief that could not afford to show. We play for them now, every single minute. It was not about winning anymore, it was about surviving. United was more than a club now, it was a family, stitched together by tragedy, bound by the promise of rebirth. And while Matt Busby and Murphy rebuilt the team, another man fought a different, lonelier battle. Captain James Stein, the pilot who had survived, was wrongly blamed for the crash. Official reports claimed he failed to de-ice the wings, a theory that was later proven false. For 11 years, he lived as a scapegoat, waging a relentless campaign to clear his name. It was not until 1969 that the truth was officially acknowledged. It was the slash on the runway, the layer of the slash he had feared, that caused the tragedy, not failure into cockpit. For the families and the club, it was late and cold comfort, a second tragedy of injustice layered upon the first. From the snow of Munich rose a story that would outlive generations. The Busby Babes were gone, but their spirit refused to die. For Matt Busby, survival was not just a gift, it was a mission. In 1968, a decade after the tragedy, United finally lifted the European Cup under the floodlights at Wembley Stadium. Bobby Charlton, who had once been pulled from the wreckage, lifted the trophy high. It was more than victory, it was vindication. It was for Roger, for Duncan, for Tommy, and for all the teammates who never came home. It was for a pilot whose name was finally cleared. Today at Old Trafford, a clock still stands frozen at 3:04 p.m., the moment time stopped in Munich. Each year, supporters gather, voices rising in unison, not just to mourn, but to remember. The dream that was born in the heart of Manchester, shattered in the snow of Munich airport, was reborn in the lights of Wembley. And though the clock at Old Trafford remained frozen at 3:04, the dreams of the Busby Babes, like the spirits of the club they built, beats on. And so, we return to that photograph. To Matt Busby at Wembley, the European Cup in his hands, his face etched not with simple joy, but with profound, painful weight of a promise finally fulfilled. If the question we began with was, what is the true price of a dream? Then the snow of Munich gave us the unbearable answer. The price was youth, it was talent, it was 8 futures, shimmering with potential, brutally stolen. The price was paid in the currency of grief and compounded by a decade of wrongful blame. And if we asked, what does it mean to be left behind, tasked with building a future from the pieces of a shattered past? The decades since have whispered the response. It means to carry the memory. It means to build, not for yourself, but for them. It means to ensure that a clock frozen in time at 3:04 p.m. does not mean that hope is frozen too. The snow of Munich eventually melted, The wreckage was cleared away. The black headlines of the newspapers faded to yellow. A pilot's name was finally cleared. But the story did not end. It simply changed form. And so, a final word to both Manchester United supporters and those who stand in rivalry, not just about history, but about what it means today. To every Manchester United supporter, this story is your inheritance. It is the sacred text written not in ink, but in loss and resilience. When you sing, "We'll Never Die," you're not just singing for the team. You are singing for Roger, for Duncan, for Eddie, and for all those who never came home. You are the keepers of this flame. Carry it with the pride and respect it deserves. And to those who stand in rivalry, who may not wear the red, we ask you to see beyond the game. This is not a story about a football club. It is a human story. A story of young men full of promise, a tragedy that exists beyond rivalry, and an injustice that took years to rectify. There is no tribalism in a graveyard. In this chapter of history, we are all united by a common humanity, by the universal language of loss, and by a shared respect for the courage it takes to carry on. The Busby Babes never grow old. They remain forever young, forever brilliant, forever on the point of greatness. And in a way, that is the source of Manchester United's eternal flame. It is the club forever chasing the ghost of its own perfect, lost past, bound by a debt that can never be fully repaid, only honored. Honored in every roar from the Stretford end, in every shirt worn with pride, in every dream, no matter how impossible, that the day has to rise once more from the shadows. We will never die.